Welcome to Happily Divorced with Karishma. If you've ever looked at your life and thought, this is not how it's supposed to be, this episode is for you. Today, I want to explore the truth that changed everything for me. Maybe you were never off track. Maybe the delays, the detours, the heartbreak, all of it was divine. Let's talk about how to release the shame, honor your evolution, and finally come home to your own timing. Let's begin. Hello, everybody. Today, I wanted to explore recreating your own story. Sometimes life shows us what is working, and life often shows us what is not working. I wanted to explore the notion of having the courage to change today, because when things aren't working, it's not about you being a failure. Sometimes it's just about redirection and moving into something different. Years ago, I thought things would be a certain way. When I was in my 20s, I wanted to be a New York Times bestseller. I dreamt that one day I would be co-hosting a show with Oprah with my New York Times best-selling book and having incredible business success while impacting lives. Then in my 30s, life happened. I had children. I had this incredible experience of traveling the world with my ex-husband while his work took us to Dubai. And then we settled down and had our babies, the twins, that are turning 14 years old in just less than a month, which is completely crazy. In my 30s, it was about corporate career, corporate moving up. And then life happened and I was brought into entrepreneurship in my late 30s, almost 40s. And where I'm going with this is I've encountered people after people, and I was one of those people that would question everything. Why is this happening? Why am I a failure because this didn't happen or that didn't happen? And, sometimes when things don't go our way, we have two choices. Choice one is to beat ourselves up, to make ourselves wrong. I know this was the case for me. In every personal development seminar, it's about using pain as a driver to amplify the pain, to see yourself not doing the thing that you wanted, 20, 30, 40 years from now, and using pain as a driver to step into some kind of action. Pretty much, I'm summarizing every personal development seminar, and I can tell you for a fact that using pain as a leverage only goes so far. And I wanted to explore something a little bit different. What if things didn't work out in the past because you weren't ready? What if the whole purpose of being in a situation, whether it's a job situation, whether it's a home situation, whether it's a kid or parenting situation, what if it wasn't about you not being enough or you failing your perception of how things should have been? And maybe the whole point was to be in the preparation of something else. And maybe the whole purpose of every interaction, every experience, every job, every business, every relationship status, friendship status, what if the purpose of all of those things wasn't about you not making it to this goal, this perception of how you should have been, but maybe the whole purpose of it all was to be exactly where you were? What if this idea of coincidences just didn't exist? What if everything was happening in divine order? And what if you were exactly where you were supposed to be? And sometimes life happens. And I was talking about the whole career thing. Well, in 2025, it's a really interesting world that we live in. And I can speak as a real estate investor now, as a coach to a lot of people that have been successful investors, successful entrepreneurs, successful venture capitalist folks, all the things. This year has been particularly uncanny and particularly hard on a lot of people's bank accounts and wallets. And maybe when things are not working out in the way that you think, maybe there's a blessing in disguise to all of those things. For me personally, when I look back at my life, and I'm going to go back to a couple of experiences in my corporate world, towards the end, I hit massive burnout and overwhelm. I did what I knew how to do. And I did the same thing in my business life, which was to push harder, to go harder, and do exactly what I was taught along the way, where it got to the point where I couldn't push anymore, where my body was resistant to every push. And instead of pushing through things, I can look back and see that when my body was in resistance, when my body was in shutdown mode, my body was telling me something that I wasn't quite ready to see at the time. My body was telling me this isn't working anymore. And I'm saying my body because our bodies hold on to emotions. Our bodies hold on to our feelings. Our bodies hold on to things that are happening. Let's say something doesn't feel good. It's a relationship, whether it's an interaction, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a work interaction, and we have this feeling of, ooh, something's not right. What we tend to do as human beings, and I know I'm definitely very guilty of this in the past, is we tell ourselves it shouldn't be this, it shouldn't be that. And we shut ourselves from experiencing the very experience that is there. The very experience that is causing us pain is perhaps causing us pain, not for us to justify it and make ourselves wrong for having the thought, but maybe the whole point of having that experience, having that pain, having those thoughts and those discomforts was to help us come back home to ourselves, to be like, you know what? Maybe this isn't supposed to work out. Maybe it's not about what society has told me to be, my parents told me to be, what my coworkers told me to be, what my friends told me to be, what society told me to be. What if this thing that is creating massive discomfort in my life, what if this is actually redirection? What if my body having a meltdown, my body having physical burnout, my body having stress, that last fight, that last night falling asleep, crying endless tears, what if all of those things were there to help us finally see ourselves, to help us finally get in touch with ourselves and who we really are, and for us to finally slow down and just listen? And I was thinking about it this morning before recording this podcast. It's this inner battle of ego versus soul. Ego tells us it should be this, it should be that. Why aren't you this? Why aren't you that? And so on and so forth. Maybe the whole point of us being how we are is because we're intended to be that. Maybe God didn't make mistakes. Maybe we're exactly where we're supposed to be. And maybe there is nothing wrong in us or nothing wrong in what happened. But maybe the whole purpose of the pain, the whole purpose of the suffering, and I'm sure you can think of a relationship that went awry. Maybe it was a romantic relationship that went awry or a friendship that went awry. Now, in retrospect, in hindsight, you can look back and see all the things, all the lessons, all the hundreds of examples where you can be like, oh my God, yes, it's so obvious. Look, it wasn't meant to be. Or it could be a work interaction, a business interaction, a job role that didn't work out. And you can look back at all the evidence and be like, oh my God, that's why it didn't work out. And maybe that's the whole point of it all, for us to finally start coming home to ourselves and to finally connect inside with what's happening. To be like, oh my God, instead of me telling myself, I should do this, I should do that, it should be this, it should be that, and getting out of that should cycle. What if it's about, wait a minute, this doesn't feel good, and aligning to the feeling of what is? And maybe when things don't go our way, they weren't meant to. Maybe we can't force an outcome, even though we're told we can, but maybe all of it could simply just be a redirection, a blessing into something fruitful, a blessing into a beautiful experience, a blessing into something more miraculous than we ever could have experienced. And when things happen, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes our egos have a meltdown. When it's time to shift a course, when it's time to shift out of a business, it's time to shift out of a job, it's time to shift out of a relationship, instead of going into the second guessing of what we could have done to be different, for it to be different, and going down that mental hamster wheel that doesn't create anything productive. What if the whole purpose of it is to truly accept it for what it is? You know, there was a story I heard when I was a little girl. There's this book that I read growing up. It was called When You Hear Hoofbeats, Think of a Zebra. And in that book, there was sort of religious anecdotes after anecdotes, like chicken soup for the soul, but with religious context. There's a story that particularly comes to mind, and it was about a farmer. And the farmer lived in a small town, and he had an animal. When something wonderful happened, the neighbors would come and gush all over him, say like, oh my God, what a miracle, how amazing. And he would say, maybe it's a blessing, maybe it's a curse, only God knows. And then something else happened, and there was a calamity. His son gets, I believe, trampled by this horse that was doing really well for him. And the neighbors came and said, oh my God, you're so cursed, and what a misfortune. And the guy said, maybe it's a blessing, maybe it's a curse, only God knows. And then a few months later, all of the neighbors, little boys and men, were sent off to war, many of them which never came home. And in that moment, all the neighbors came to the farmer and said, oh my God, you were so lucky. your son got to stay home as a result of this accident. And he said, maybe it's a blessing, maybe it's a curse. Only God knows. And the moral of the story is, sometimes we don't know. We don't have the gift of the blessing of seeing the whole picture for what it is. But maybe when things don't go well, we take a moment to really just sit with the evidence of it. Because life is showing us it's working or it really isn't. And the evidence is right there. But instead of running away from the evidence when things aren't going well and running away from it, trying 30, 50, 80, 100 solutions to fix it, maybe it's time just to take a pause and be like, wait, what is this trying to tell me? Is this what's right for me? Is this in alignment with me? Is this what I truly want? And often it's our egos that say, okay, it's me. I should have figured this out. Our egos often tell us we should know better, that we should have resolved it already, that, oh my God, why is this happening to me? It almost protects us from that humility pill that sometimes life is wanting to teach us. But how amazing would it be to take a moment, to take a breath and be like, wow, this is what the evidence is showing me. For the first time, I'm tapping into how I feel and realizing it really doesn't feel that good. And instead, what if I surrender it to God, get off of my high horse and say, okay, I just don't know. Maybe it's a blessing. Maybe it's a curse. Only God knows. And having that courage to change is so amazing because so many people stay stuck in the same vicious cycle. When I believe true courage is what's needed to break the cycle, to get the support once and for all, and to realize that we're truly worthy and deserving of everything that we've ever wanted. And it's just a small reach away from us living the version of life that we always wanted. Thank you for listening.